Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to What's on the Playlist today. Today I want to talk about an album called Ruben and the Jets by Frank Zappa and the Mother of Invention, and image of which you will see here. Um, this is a somewhat unusual album for Frank Zappa. Um, According to the stories, um, like the studio engineer and a bunch of the band members were hanging out in the recording studio. They were doing recording sessions and stuff. And they got talking about the high school days and their love of the 50s doo-wop style of music. And then a bunch of the band members kind of started like singing and playing the songs just for fun. And Frank Zappa suggested they make a doo-wop album. Um, Frank Zappa has said this album is kind of an homage to, the music he grew up listening to as a teenager. Although Frank Zappa has famously said he despises love songs. He considers them stupid and insipid. So any love songs on this album, he has deliberately written to, in his own words, be sub-mongoloid. His words. So this is both an homage to 50s doo-wop music and a satirization of it as well. Something Frank Zappa did quite a lot in his music. Lost my train of thought. Oh, at the time they were recording this, they were also writing and recording Uncle Meat, We're Only in It for the Money, and Lumpy Gravy. And Zappa said that like these four albums combined are basically like just one long album. They're all the pieces are all connected. He's like, I can just cut these songs apart, put them back together again in a different order, and they would still make sense. And then he could do it again and cut them up again and rearrange them in a different way, and it would still make sense. Just because he's like he kind of wrote these were all written and recorded around the same time. For the songs on this album, How Could I Be Such a Fool? You Didn't Try to Call Me, Any Way the Wind Blows, and I can never remember the fourth one. But those four were all on their first album, Mothers of Invention, but they were rearranged to sound like 50s doo-wop style music. And it's unusual that I find songs from a band like this where, like, usually I will strongly prefer the songs I heard originally. I don't like remakes like this. This is an exception. I do really like the doo-wop style of these versions, and I think maybe even somewhat better. The album was actually somewhat of a commercial success, partly because people who heard it the first time didn't realize it was Frank Zappa. They figured they'd discovered an unknown, doo-wop album from an unknown band from years ago, and figured, oh wow, this is so cool. It actually got some radio play. The album itself actually reached 110 on the top Billboard 200 charts. However, when it was discovered that it was actually Frank Zappa's music, interest waned, which I find fascinating that people liked it when they didn't know it was Frank Zappa. There is a comment on the cover of the album. I don't know if this is on the original printing, but it says, "Is this the Mothers of Invention recording under a different name and a last-ditch attempt to get their cruddy music on the radio?" So I don't think this is on the original album cover release. It does, like a lot of Frank Zappa albums, this is a story, and they kind of wrote a fictional character bio. This is the back cover of the album, a pic of high school picture of Frank Zappa with the title of Ruben Sanyo. Like fictionally, like Ruben Sanyo was this teenager who got created a group of like Chicano musicians doing 50s style doo-wop music. And there's like this is like whole long thing here, which if you read it a long time, it's like Ruben was 19 when he quit the band to work in his car. He had just saved money to buy a 53 Nash and 4 primers of gray paint. His girlfriend said she would break up with him if it didn't leave the band. But they really kind of went, Zappa went heavy. I'm surprised that this is still in here. This was in the original liner notes of the album, but they kept it in for the CD, which I'm so glad of. So many CDs just got rid of the inner liner material. Another thing which I didn't, inside the album cover, this is an album of greasy love songs and cretin simplicity. We made it because we really like this kind of music, just a bunch of old men with rock and roll clothes sitting around the studio mumbling about the good old days. They admit that's what it is, but they've got like instructions on how to do the pompadour hairdo, which they call the jelly roll. There's some dance steps over here, and it says, listening to the nifty beat of Ruben and the Jets will undoubtedly make you want to do the bop. The urge to dance will overpower you because of this uncontrollable force. A page of detailed bop dance steps instructions is enclosed. They went hard on this album. They really, really just, went to the whole concept. A lot of music critics of the day kind of credited Frank Zappa for being at the forefront of the 50s style music revival, which he really didn't do that. They were just goofing around the studio and decided to make an album out of it, kind of on the fly. When they were recording this at the same time they were recording Uncle Meat, and they basically said it was easy because the music is so easy. So the music, the 50s doo-wop style music is very simple. There's not a lot of chords, not a lot of complexity. It's very, very basic, simple music. Was originally written and recorded by people who didn't have a lot of formal music training, which not necessarily a bad thing. The music was wildly popular, and it was fun to listen to. You don't need to be a virtuoso to make fun music. So that's not me being critical. It's just a fact. It's simple music. The one thing I do want to make about the musical stylings of this album, Frank Zappa has said separately from other interviews and things that the doo-wop music from the 50s era has a certain sound to it. It has certain notes, certain chord progressions, certain beats and tempos. And Zappa deliberately tweaked that a little bit. Instead of playing an A, he would, an A chord, he would use an A7 chord. Instead of using, like a 3/4 tempo, he would use a 3/5 tempo. He did something, I don't know those things are exactly true, but he did something like that. He changed the tempo a little bit, he changed the notes a little bit so that it's technically correct. But also, if you listen to it, you can hear that there's just something not quite right about it. When I grew up, when I was a little kid, it was so close enough to the 50s that you would still hear music like this on the radio. Some radio stations, classic rock stations, but there was also all the old movies were still around. They'd play them on television, the old Elvis movies. Some of the original music by the Beatles and Rolling Stones, from the early 60s, had its roots in both rhythm and blues and the old 50s style of music. So, I was, people like me and adults too were familiar with what the sound should be. And I didn't, I knew this was a Frank Zappa album. I knew it was a send-up of 50s doo-wop music. But until that information about how he tweaked it, I got from a Frank Zappa autobiography, which I do have over there. That's right, and he says that he deliberately tweaked it to make it off. And like I said, for years, I didn't know exactly. I thought it was just, I knew he did something, but I didn't know specifically what it was that he had done to make it sound odd. And I like that concept, that he, I didn't know why it was wrong, why it sounded a bit off. I just was it's Frank Zappa, he's weird. But knowing that he did it deliberately, to make the people who were listening to it know that there was something wrong with it, but couldn't identify it. You'd have to really, really know the music. You'd have to, you know, be able to hear the chords and know exactly what the chords are being played to say, wait, this should be an A. It's an A7. Sorry. Excuse me. I felt like I sucked up a piece of lint. Whew. Whew. That was rough. Don't inhale lint, kids. It's not good for you. Whew. Is my face red? Whew, it feels hot. Crikey, mate. So, now that I'm almost going to kill myself on screen. So, that was my final piece anyway. Holy crap. Glad I didn't vomit on screen. So, that's it. He did it deliberately. It sounds weird on purpose. Whew. And I really like the concept. If that sounds interesting to you, give it a listen. As always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.